Hello and welcome to this session by Joseph. This session, of course, will be recorded, so don't be concerned that you might have a chance to be able to watch this online. So Joseph, over to you. You can tell us about yourself.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. Just briefly to first start out, it's a Moodle case study, and we're more specifically talking about implementing a Moodle LMS and course development, and specifically a closed environment, so solely on an intranet. That being said, my name is Joseph Broeker. Welcome. I'm an LMS administrator at an institute located in the Gulf region in the Middle East. And let's get on with the presentation. So there'll be four different areas that we're going to start out with. First is giving you an introduction to the background of the Institute, briefing you on the starting point of where our LMS was a few years ago, and tips on our strategy and implementation for getting more LMS use, and finally into the course development with materials and activities used. And I'd like to mention that all the examples that I'm going to use are from teachers that developed the activities with just brief knowledge of Moodle. Institute background, apologies for all the points here, but I'll run through these really briefly so you know where we're coming from. As I mentioned, mostly technicians are our students, electrical, instrumental, or mechanical. School size is about 1,000 students. This term we have 134 active online courses, and that makes up about 350 classes. Our system currently, we have no unique student accounts. So there are generic student accounts created by our IT department, and those are used by students to log in to computers in a computer lab or from group sets of iPads that are issued. Also, there's no personal devices allowed to connect to the intranet. And as we mentioned, student accounts have been blocked from accessing any internet sites. Another thing is school intranet systems are only accessible from the campus. So the last two things here, though, of course, all students are issued unique LMS accounts through Moodle, and they're expected to be evaluated on a daily basis. Second part, so within this framework, where did we start out a few years ago? As I mentioned, we had limited student access, so students would very rarely access the LMS, possibly at a midterm break or end of term. We had limited software available to teachers, and that's still more or less the case now. Pretty much we have your basic Microsoft Office products, a few Adobe. I myself and two others have accounts with Adobe, I believe Captivate and Articulate, but we use that sporadically for SCORM activities. And mentioned that the teachers themselves would only use the LMS mostly at midterm break. Welcome everybody that's coming in to the presentation. My name is Joe or Joseph. We had, as mentioned, there's limited use by instructors. Mostly was to enter in midterm grades or final grades. So essentially, instructors were keeping, maybe you've seen this before, spreadsheets on their desktop or in a shared file that was only accessible by the section, until pressure was put on by the head management that they would then upload those grades to the LMS so that they would be connected to the SIS, and then counselors can view them and other admin personnel. So the next stat there, about 300,000 hits per 4-month term, shows you the limit of how much the system is being used. I put down the average age of the instructor, 55. So more of the staff have been there for quite a number of years. Not to mention that they were totally against any new type of technology, but as I mentioned, more set in their ways, using shared folders, or spreadsheets, etc. On the opposite hand, they were hiring new staff and of course the younger staff, and they were more excited about the new apps being offered and Web 2.0 platforms. But with those teachers, we had to also educate them on the limited parameters of our system and to direct them to Moodle for course development. Okay, the next part, strategy and implementation. So obviously we wanted to focus on how to clearly demonstrate the advantages of an LMS, obviously, over a shared folder system. And as we know, one of the key points there is a focus on organization of material and a better navigation system. So that we focused on training, showing instructors how they could access material more quickly with their courses. But the main caveat here was there was a system-wide policy that disabled USB drives for instructors. And essentially what teachers were doing were more or less putting presentations or course material on thumb drives and then using those in the classroom to upload directly to the computer. But once those were disabled, they tried to work through shared folders and mapping drives, but they found it was quite cumbersome doing that in each of the classrooms. So then they finally were able to see that the LMS was a better way to get material. Second part, we started out simple with instructors. That would mean not trying to get it overly complicated, introduced easy activities that they could create, and then worked from there. The third part here we said, of course, was demonstrating how the LMS could greatly reduce paper use. And that was one of the major complaints we had from staff and students. Currently, there's a lot of assessment going on at the Technical Institute, and instructors and students would more or less carry around these large portfolios that would contain all of their evidence, and from workbooks to manuals to different pieces of paper that showed the evidence of the coursework they had done. And once they were able to see how the LMS could take away a lot of the paperwork, they were more than happy to start working with it. Of course, the next thing with that is time savings and also developing the online testing, which I'll talk about briefly. And finally, offering advanced training to those instructors more familiar with e-learning environments and showing them how they could develop their courses more extensively. All right, so those are all the strategy that we used. And the next slide, we're going to show where we're at now currently with our LMS. So we have a lot of high numbers here, but as I mentioned, we have 134 active courses. We have considerably a number of other courses, but are inactive at this point. But just a brief overview: 5,000 assignments. There's 4,000 folders. Same in files. 3,000 quizzes, which also make up our online testing. A lot of lesson modules are being used. The Lightbox Gallery is a plugin that is used to organize our photo banks. We also use the survey activity. Currently, there's 100 of those, and more or less students are required to evaluate their course at the end of the term. And finally, we have a limited use of the SCORM objects, as I mentioned. Now, what does that look like in our system? I'm going to show you just a quick stat here, pulled just last week from our LMS. And if you can see that, it's just, you see a roller coaster ride with the graph. But the 2 points here I wanted to make first was that now we're experiencing 200,000 upwards weekly page hits. So roughly accomplishing the same amount of page hits that took us the whole term within 1 week. And there, the dipping point, those are the weekends, and that represents where we have no access to our LMS on the weekends. Maybe the future, but currently security is a concern with the institute, so they lock it down completely. Okay, so that's the background. Now we're going to get on to the actual work that instructors have done at the Institute. And some of these maybe question types later might be something you haven't seen before, but initially it's basic material upload, nothing exciting, um, but that was part of the strategy at the beginning, is to keep it simple. And as mentioned, so with course material, we had our first thing we put on were online manuals, and those were more or less just our PDF documents, and they would still be issued paper manuals, but this acted as a focal point for where instructors could then broadcast them in the classroom. Or if the student did have a classroom issued iPad, he could always download the PDF onto that tablet. We did have limited development of the book module, but those are more labor intensive, and our manuals seem to change from term to term, so we haven't gone that route yet. As mentioned, we have thousands of images and hundreds of lightbox galleries that are used, and those are fairly easy to set up by our teachers. The last part under the material would be the presentations. These are nothing exciting here. It's just mostly PowerPoints that are uploaded and downloaded onto the teacher computer. We have some score and presentations that students can access from their iPads. And we're also starting the H5P presentations that'll start out this term. Another thing we've used also is the light boxes here for uploading slides and then just flipping through the slides as a presentation. Okay, now onto the actual coursework. And I don't know if you could see the actual screenshot here, but this is simply one of the first assignments we had uploaded, and it's just using the quiz assignment and choosing an essay question. But the difference here is we went down and enabled a response template. More or less, the instructor said they had their worksheets simply had several short answers that the students need to enter, and they wanted to check them as just complete or incomplete. So we found that this was the easiest way that they could upload their workbooks, and that they could only then have to check off only on one essay question. If you fill out several essay questions, and as you know that you have to manually grade each one of those, it becomes more time intensive. Also, you also know the inline assignments, where if you post the questions above, our students are not don't have the highest level of typing skills, so they had difficulty in arranging all the questions in the essay part. So we found that the essay question enabling response template was a quick, easy step for getting worksheets online. The second step with coursework was actually creating portfolio evidence and shifting that from our portfolio or physical manuals to the LMS, and essentially just using the assignment and enable upload. If you can see that picture directly in the middle, that's a student in front of something we call a workbench. He has to construct that and then make sure it works properly, and then show that he actually has done the task correctly. So essentially, they'll build the workbench, stand in front of it, have someone take a picture of them with their iPad, and then upload that directly to Moodle. On the right of them, if it's maybe a little difficult to see, there's just an example of a diagram. They're also required to create electrical diagrams, and that is a worksheet, physical paper, but they just sign their name at the top, take a picture of that, and then upload it directly to the LMS. So once again, two easy ways that they can track their evidence within LMS. The third part are teacher observations of students. And beforehand, we had, oh, thanks, you can see that. Beforehand, we had typical rubrics that instructors would stand in front of students while they're at a workbench. They would perform a task, and then they would check off if they'd completed the task correctly. A lot of times those tasks were comprised of subtasks, 10 to 15 steps, so they'd have to check them off. Then they would get a value at some point, put that on a Excel sheet, and at a later time then upload that directly to the LMS. So a lot of steps, a lot of paperwork, and a lot of complaints by instructors. So steering them towards the offline assignment, but then enabling a rubric was one of the first things we were able to go to once we had iPads issued to the teachers. So now they can simply stand in front of a student face-to-face time and enter in the task directly to the iPad. So that's very popular now, and on to the next coursework. So we're on the last part of coursework, and here we are with our actual, as we all know, the automated quiz activities. So at the Institute, there are a lot of tools and hardware definitions that students need to learn. So simply by creating multiple choice questions, we're all familiar with those. But for starting out our teachers, this is where we went to. Also the diagrams, drop-down menus. Just a standard multiple choice question. The second part was then moving up to the drag and drop markers question type. We use an older Moodle version. It comes with Core now, I believe, but this was a plugin that we put into Moodle. You're probably familiar with this as well, but students enjoy this. It's a little easier to locate the definitions on the diagram. And those work well with the iPad. The second slide here is the same type. It's a drag and drop markers question, but just a little more complex. It shows you can use several labels to mark a diagram. Once again, this is all done by our teachers. Here's the same question type, but we're showing image upon image where students are required to match symbols on the correct location of the diagram. Another slide with the drag and drop question type, and this is an example of constructing a motor. So you can do a much fancier job through other types of software, Articulate and Captivate, but for instructor with limited time, I believe I taught this instructor within an afternoon, and he made several activities by the end of the day. So it's really quick and easy for them to use. Okay, another type of question that we use is the numerical question. On the right, here's a student operating a workbench, and typically they have a valve to turn. They have different readings that they need to find, like, for example, the temperature reading. In the past, they would have a clipboard with a worksheet or a spreadsheet, and they would have to enter in several different calculations. Now they just enter in a number into the Moodle directly on their iPad while they're in front of the workbench, and it can automatically grade them on that question. Before, of course, the worksheet would be turned to the teacher, and they'd have to grade that manually. And this works well too, because a lot of the temperatures or the readings, they'll have a range, so we put those into the answer as well. Yeah, that's a good question. Image size is can be a problem. Sometimes they can blow up on you, and I found depending on our browser that we use, sometimes it doesn't necessarily work correctly. So you're right. You have to. Sometimes we'll even just we'll create the image size ourselves first, and then we'll send it back to them using Photoshop. Yeah, like I mentioned, we don't have a quick solution there. I'm pretty busy on the admin part, but I had another person who was an editor. They would submit their photos, and then he would use Photoshop to create the current standard image size. I'm not sure what that is right now, so that's one of the ways we solve that. But as I mentioned, yeah, it's not a very quick way of doing it. Here's another example of a question type. Here's just a simple close, and this is where you can see in the bottom there's some writing. This is all on Moodle, and takes a little bit more time to make. But why did we go that route? Well, for sometimes the workshops require students to move around and then locate different objects, hardware or tools, and then name and locate those objects. Here it is, drop-down menus that they need to fill out, and it's the standard template. But instead of going through several questions in a quiz or scrolling up and down, it's just on one slide. Same thing on the next page here. It's an embedded close as well, a little more complex. And here you have several different question types, some of the numerical value and the others of drop-down menus. But instead of instructors having to grade this all manually, it's all done through Moodle at this time. Okay, formal testing. I'm moving through here kind of quickly, so we'll get to some questions if you have any, or a discussion at the end. But really quickly, also with formal testing, if you noticed on the front of the presentation course page, I've placed a couple of documents, also a link that I have a web page just through the Moodle Cloud. I think it's called YAS Class, moodlecloud.com, and you can view any of these activities that I'm going through if you want to see how they look in the system. So formal testing, of course, we use the Moodle quiz activity, same as the work activities. Last term we had around 10,000 online tests, so pretty much everything's done online except our writing test with English. The primary concern with sections was making sure the tests were secure from students. And of course, those are the standard options that we enable: password protect, date and time, making sure people are aware of the group override function because we have several groups that are on each of our courses. And most importantly was using the Safe Exam Browser plugin, and that this plugin is installed on each of our computers in our testing center. And that's where we do all of our testing. Actually, we have 3 testing centers, upwards to 80 students at a time. The second part, of course, was making sure the tests were secure from instructors, especially those that had editing permissions on courses. So part of that had to be educating our testing coordinators on where to locate questions within a course, also how they can set local permissions directly on the test. And then those that were very wary of secure test, we would create another course in itself, which would contain that final test or unit test. And by using the sub-course plugin, I put a little screenshot of the plugin, we use that to then pull in the grade from that test course to the main course page. And that way we can set all permissions directly on that course. So there's a brief overview of our LMS. I hope you were able to catch most of it. Like I said, all the examples I've used here were constructed by teachers, and we're hopefully continue to use Moodle in the future. And thank you for your time. Are there any questions people had right now? Yeah, that's like I mentioned, yeah, thank you. We're in the middle station in the Middle East, and people are very concerned about test security here. So one of the next steps I'd like to do with testing is having more multiple randomization of tests. People are still stuck in the time frame of you create a test, you put it online, and then after that test is finished, and you create another one for the following term. I'm trying to get more of a pooled banks of questions. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one of our contentions right now. Some people are using iPads, but we thoroughly explained to them that we don't have, I believe it would be Respondus would be the app through Moodle to secure the browser. We don't have that available. So if people or sections do want to have a test online, we just make sure they understand that it's not 100% secure, and explain to them that the student can exit the test if they want. And some people say that's fine, that the test is designed, it's not a problem for them. So it's usually case by case basis, but usually as a general school policy, they say no, all tests should be conducted in our testing center. Yeah, well, right. You know, I think another thing I mentioned with testing, if we're talking about that, is we make sure that we have student images that are all uploaded, and we block the profile uh, so that when we monitor and proctor the examinations, the test center, we can see that it's the image, the same student that's logged in. That was an important step as well.
Thanks, Joe. I'll just jump in here. So thank you so much.
Okay.
That was really awesome. Don't forget, if anybody has any further questions, you can always catch Joseph in the forums for this session, or he actually did a previous session on this as well. So you can go back and check both of those forums. Or if you want to watch it again, of course, you can see it on the replay. Thank you so much for your time, Joe. It was fantastic. We hope to see you back at iMoot next time.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Winnie. Thanks, everybody, for showing up.